First, giving honor to God, who is the source of all my strength, all I am, all I ever was, and all that I could ever hope to be. I just want to say good morning to all of you. Good day, good evening, and let you know what indeed an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure it is for me to have the opportunity to stand before you. This weekend, we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Friday, January 15th, was his actual birthday. He would have been 92 years old this week. Dr. King is still being celebrated today because the messages that he taught are still poignant, applicable, and more important than ever. I just want to share a little bit about Dr. King because sometimes we place him on a pedestal and we make him more than human. He was human. He was a man with an idea and a message and a dream. One thing I want to share with you that many of you probably don't know is that Martin Luther King was not born Martin Luther King. His given name at that time was Michael Luther King Jr. And at some point when King, as a boy, discovered who Martin Luther was, he and his father both changed their names to Martin Luther. And who was Martin Luther? He was the individual who tacked what's known as the 95 Theses on the door of the church at Wittenberg that reformed the Catholic Church. So Dr. King and his father wanted to be a part of reform. They wanted to be a part of changing things from the way they were to the way that they could be, and in some ways, the way that they should be. When Martin Luther King was a boy, Martin Luther King did not grow up poor, contrary to popular opinion. And for him to be born in 1929 and to have what was known as the Great Depression happening all around him, his family owned their own home. His father was a minister, his grandfather was a minister, and his mother played piano and organ in church. As a boy, Dr. King lived on Auburn Avenue, now known as Sweet Auburn Avenue, where businesses owned by black people thrived. Directly across the street were houses of people who worked in local and nearby factories, many of which were white. Dr. King at some point had the opportunity to play with his white neighbors across the street, and they were children. I think this tells us something about our very nature, that we don't come in with these prejudices and with this racism, that we show up seeing people as people. And when he was informed he could not play with his white friend across the street, it baffled him. He didn't understand that. He had to say, why? Why is that? That doesn't make sense. It does not compute. It's not logical. So those are man-made constructs that affect the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see others. Dr. King was also a very good student, and I want to say that to the young people. He was a very good student. He actually entered college at 15 years old. He got into Morehouse College to be one of the youngest students to enter that institution in its history. Also, he was such a good student that at times he could miss school and not fall behind in his lessons. So I'm going to share this with you. Dr. King loved his grandmother, and his grandmother loved him dearly. They had a great relationship. They used to sing together. They used to play the piano together. And one day, little Martin Luther King decided to cut school and go see a movie. And he went to the movie house, and when he came back, he saw an ambulance in front of his house that was taking his grandmother away because she had suffered a heart attack or a stroke or some incident that required her to be hospitalized and to be carried away. He thought She was so disappointed and upset that he had cut school, which she didn't even know at that point, that it gave her a heart attack and that she had to be hospitalized. So he was screaming, for his grandmother, and the great relationship that they had, and afraid that something might happen to her. And as the story goes, he went upstairs in their 2-story house and went to the second floor window and jumped out of the window, because he wanted to be with his grandmother and he wanted her to know how bad he felt about what he had done and the effect that it may have had on her. The story goes that he hit his head and that he lay motionless in the front yard for a few minutes. And they came out to see about him, and he was fine. But that changed his approach to education and to the respect that he had for his elders forever. He never wanted to let them down. We don't want to let our young people down, and our young people don't want to let us down. And so King gives us the opportunity to be better than we were before. And we still celebrate Dr. King because the messages are profound. He delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28th in 1963 at approximately 4:18 in the afternoon. Nobody knew exactly what he was going to say, but what ultimately came out is something that is still celebrated, listened to, recited, and ruminated on even today. So we're going to begin today's assembly with the "I Have a Dream" speech, and I just want you guys to really listen to what was going on in the country and what was going on in the world and figure out where we've gotten better and where we still have some work to do. He participated in what was known as the Civil Rights Movement because he believed in the rights of everyone and that we could be civil and kind to one another. A very important part of the movement was the idea of singing and songs. Some people would say that songs are a prayer prayed twice. And so these songs meant so much to them that when they were in jail and when they were in trouble and when they were being beaten and chased and hosed with fire hoses or attacked with with dogs, one of the things that they did, no matter what was going on, was they sang. And it moved them to a place where they were free, where they could feel the union with other people who were joining with them in song to make everything better, even just for a moment. So before we do the speech, I just want to share one of those songs from the Civil Rights Movement, and I'd like to bring to the stage right now Miss Camille Lord Wyatt and Mayoko, who will share the song, "Oh Freedom."
Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be and go home to my Lord and be free.
I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro has languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize this shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. The architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on its promissory note insofar as its citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come here today to cash this check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there's something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. Many of our white brothers and sisters have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, and their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, let us make the pledge to always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those in the devotees of civil rights who will ask, well, when will you be satisfied? But we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and hotels of the cities. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, for whites only. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as there's a Negro in Mississippi who cannot vote, or a Negro in New York who believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I'm not unmindful that many of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Alabama, go back to Mississippi, go back to Georgia, go back to South Carolina, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that this situation can and will be changed. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream today that one day, down in Alabama with its vicious racist, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, right there in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today that one day my 4 little children will be able to live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and human dignity. I have a dream today that one day, every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America's to become a great nation, this must become true. And so, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring from every state and every city, from every village and every hamlet, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of that old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on
Thank you so much, Miss Camille and Miss Mayoko, for bringing it. I want you to know that I feel those songs when they sing them because they travel through what we call the vista of time, and they reach us and touch us no matter where we are. The songs were important because it brought us together. And I just need to address the fact that King sometimes gets labeled as the guy who was just looking out for black people. And that is so far from the truth. He saw racism as a hurdle to get to the real issues that we face as a nation, as a people, and as a world. Some of those issues include homelessness and poverty. And King believed that there was enough food, enough money, enough clothes, enough jobs, enough cars, enough hopes, and enough dreams to take care of the world over and again. So we don't live in a world of lack. There is more than enough to go around. Sometimes we might have to share. Sometimes we might have to redistribute the wealth and the resources so that everybody has what they need. And we have it and the ability to have that on the planet right now. But King saw that some 50 years ago. He also recognized that no matter who you were, no matter what your race, color, creed, or religion, that you have a sacred obligation to be the best that you can possibly be. The best. So some of you have in your DNA, have in your mind, in your spirit, in your soul, in your body, the idea of what you are to become already. You know what you're good at. You know what makes your heart sing. You know what makes you feel good and what other people appreciate. And I'm going to tell you something, and King would support me in this. Too often, we have people in jobs that they hate. They get up and go to work every day and they're miserable because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they dreamed of doing and being and having when they were children. You can have your heart's desires, but you might have to work for it. And it's your job to offer your gifts, talents, capacities, unique abilities to the world because nobody can give them to the world like you. Those things were put in you to bring forth into this world to make the world a better place. And King came to Los Angeles on more than one occasion. And when he did, he delivered speeches to schools. And so here's one of the speeches that King delivered to students right here in Southern California, just encouraging them to be their very best.
New opportunities have opened within the last few years. And this will be even greater. All over the United States and all over the world, doors have been opened that have been closed to the Negro and other minorities in the past. The great challenge that we face is to be ready to enter these doors when they open. Ralph Waldo Emerson said in a lecture back in 1871 that if a man can write a better book or preach a better sermon or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. And this will become increasingly true. That means we're going to have to work hard. We are going to have to burn the midnight oil sometimes. We are going to have to take advantage of new opportunities, and we must set out to do our life's work so well that nobody could do it better. We must seek to do a good job, but we must not seek merely to be a good Negro doctor, for if you're setting out to be merely a good Negro doctor, or a good Asian lawyer, a good Latin preacher, a good white teacher, a good female technician, You've already flunked your matriculation exam for entrance into the University of Integration. We must get ready. We must set out to do a good job and to do that job so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it better. As I've said so often, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, then go on out and sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Raphael painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music and like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. And this is it. If you can be a pine on the top of the hill, then be a shrub in the valley, but be the best little shrub on the side of the reel. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. You just be the best of whatever you are. Thank you.
It's up to me to decide. But how can I expect to win if I never tried? I just can't give up now. I come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me the road would be easy, and I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. Never said there would be trials, never said I wouldn't fall, never said there would be according to it all. But when my back is against the wall and I feel all hope is gone, I lift my head up to the sky and help me to go on. I just can't give up now. I come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me the road would be easy, and I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. I just can't give up now. I've come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me brought me this far. I don't believe he 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 brought me this far to leave me.
Thank you. When we hear these songs and these speeches, the idea is that you are capable of things that you don't know you are capable of. You can change the world. That's the message of Martin Luther King, that one person can make a difference. I tell people all the time when I give these speeches that I will give them over and over and over again. I'm just trying to get to one person. I'm just trying to get to one person who gets it, who feels it, who is willing to take action. And I will go across the globe and speak before millions if I need to for one person to get it, because you matter. And today, when you think about Dr. King, let that one person be you, because we're tired. And we're ready for young people to take over and to lead the planet into what Dr. King called the beloved community. There's something better. And if you think, I'm a young person, what difference could I make? King made it clear that young people could make a difference. It was young people who were on the front lines of the civil rights movement. It was young people who were willing to go to jail and willing to face dogs and hoses and police and whatever it took to make the world better. Now, I know a lot of people think, well, I'm not that brave. The truth is, you don't have to be brave. You just have to be willing. The truth is, you don't have to do everything. You just have to do something. And the truth is, you don't have to be charismatic like Martin Luther King. You just have to care like Martin Luther King. So I'm going to leave you with one more. And just to remind you that young people can make a difference, in King's very last speech, he was going to Memphis to help garbage workers. And towards the end of that speech, he decided to recount an experience he had with a young person. So I'm just going to ask you to open your hearts and your minds to the words and the works and the thoughts and the feelings of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his I've Been to the Mountaintop.
One day, I was in New York signing autographs from the very first book that I had written. And while signing autographs, a black woman came up, and the only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing. I simply nodded my head yes. The next thing that I knew, I felt something beating on my chest, and I'd been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital and operated on immediately. And the doctor said that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta. That's the main artery of the heart. Once it's punctured, that's the end of you, because you're drowned in your own blood. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. It came out in the New York Times the very next day that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, they allowed me to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. I got a chance to read some of the mail that had come in and kind letters that come in from all over the United States and all over the world, and I read a few. But one of them I'll never forget. I want you to know I received a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. I received telegrams from different governors in different states and different cities, and I've forgotten what those letters said. There was a letter that came from a little girl in the White Plains High School, and I shall never forget it. She said very simply, "Dear Dr. King, I'm a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School. And while it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl." She said, "Dr. King, I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering, and that if you had merely sneezed, you would have died." She said, "Dr. King, I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." And you know, they were telling me that she must have recognized the significance, for you see, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation and interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when students all over the South were sitting in at lunch counters, and I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, taking this nation back to the great wells of democracy as dug deep by the founding fathers in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962. When we aroused the conscience and saw a community rally around those brothers and sisters who were suffering. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Albany, Georgia to see men and women straighten their backs up. For whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1963 when we brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. I wouldn't have been around here to try and tell America about a dream that I'd had if I had sneezed. But you know, it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system that we're sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all of the baggage was checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had this plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory and the coming of our Lord.
And we just want to leave you with this. This is the song of the movement. It's called We Shall Overcome. And the truth is, not we shall overcome someday, but we shall overcome today, because we can overcome the fears, the doubts, the worries, the insecurities that King was trying to liberate and free all of us from. So the song originated as a song for the labor movement, and Martin Luther King decided to recycle it because it was so important and spoke to all of our needs. It simply says, we shall overcome.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
We shall live in peace.
We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
This time we shall overcome today.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome today.